Hello, 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 and welcome to the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Cheers. I'm Marshall Kirkpatrick. I'm your host here at the Sprinklr Coffee Club, and I am so appreciative of the time that you have taken to join us here today, either as we initially broadcast this or at any point in the coming weeks. Thanks for joining us. Here at the Sprinklr Coffee Club, we like to talk about social media, modern channels of communication, digital transformation, customer experience, and the changing world. But these days we are broadcasting from home because of the shared collective experience, of course, of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so our discussion is largely focused on bringing some of the world's most innovative and exciting thinkers to discuss what they're seeing and what they're thinking about this pandemic and um, and how the world is collectively responding to it. I am excited to bring together for our dialogue today the one and only Simon Terry. Simon is the chairman of a really inspiring organization called Change Agents Worldwide. Simon and I have been connecting online for many years. We've got some mutual friends, but today is the first time that we have spoken before. So, Simon, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Marshall. It's a pleasure to join the Sprinklr Coffee Club.
Well, thank you. May your coffee be hot and delicious.
Thank you.
So, Simon, let's begin by talking a little bit about yourself and Change Agents Worldwide to set the stage. Can you tell us about your work?
Sure. So, Marshall, my work is working with organizations really around three main challenges. How can they adapt to the environment we're working in, an environment of digital change, of accelerated needs for innovation and adaptation, and how can they leverage in that the learning of their employees, the way their employees work and collaborate, and really drive that to foster innovation and that kind of adaptation. So that's the work I do. So it involves, a number of different challenges there. It's working with leaders to help them understand how to develop their people, how to lead in new ways across these new social and other collaborative tools that are available. And obviously, it's also supporting the teams and the individual employees to grow, develop, and realize, what are some exciting new opportunities for their organizations. For me, it really comes down to this purpose I have of making work more human. And I think, we see a lot of digital being focused on the technology, but what we know is the value comes from focusing on that human capability and supporting that. And Change Agents Worldwide is an organization of 50 independent consultants and enterprise practitioners who are doing very similar work to me and come together to share projects and execute on them, and also just to share best practice and learn and support each other through these changes.
Mm-hmm. I was looking at a graph today from the OECD that you may be familiar with, showing demand for various types of labor over the last 60 years, with routine manual work on the most steep decline, but routine cognitive work also on the decline, and non-routine cognitive work and non-routine interactive work more than anything else on the ascent. Is your work a part of that change?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what I see is, the change to knowledge work taking over our economies kind of passed many organizations by. They weren't concentrating on that transformation that, knowledge work in both Australia, where I live, and in the United States and around the world has taken over the work in our organizations. And recently we're seeing with things like AI, robot process automation, those routine pieces of knowledge work now coming in the domain of technology. And I think that's where organizations are now increasingly seeing the complexity, the creativity, the hard bits, the problem solving, the exception management becomes the pieces that need the most work from humans, and they're also the hardest bits to do. So they're the bits that tend to be the most collaborative. They tend to be the most novel. They tend to be the most challenging. And so the kind of work I'm doing and other change agents are doing is sort of leaning into that piece and saying, as organizations start to work, they need to work in new ways against that new kind of work, that new kind of challenge, because that's where the real value creation comes. Top-down management of your organization against a predictable task is what made General Motors great. That's not what's making the next generation of organizations great.
Hmm. So that brings to mind what Forrester calls the paradox of automation, where when everything else is automated, the only work left for humans is zero-day problems and real hairy challenges. Makes me think about John Hagel saying that the best value creation comes from frontline workers solving problems in novel ways. But one of the things that you bring to this discussion, I feel like more than so many others is an understanding of the role of collaboration and the network. What is that role?
Well, I just think all knowledge work is networked work. We are all inspired by others. We all draw our insights from the environment around us. We all pull on resources and collective knowledge and information and ideally collaborators, as we build our knowledge work. And so, understanding that it takes a network to do great knowledge work, and we don't want to be in that environment, especially when it's hard and hairy, of reinventing the wheel all the time. You can't challenge every knowledge worker to know everything and do everything from the beginning again. So this opportunity with collaboration is just to provide context to the knowledge work, to provide coordination to the knowledge work, because again, knowledge workers, just as we are, can work from their homes, they can work from anywhere, they can be out in the field. Being able to provide that coordination to a dispersed knowledge working team, and then really to be able to execute that agenda and scale up the victories. So when you have success, how do you pick them up and spread them out to everyone in your organization and land that value quickly? Because as we all know, it's not the idea, it's the execution that drives the value creation for organizations.
Hmm. So I want to ask you what that looks like tangibly in, well, frankly, the pre-COVID-19 era, and then I would love to ask you to share uh, how it's changing and to queue up our conversation about this current dilemma.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, if I give you sort of tangible examples, so I've done a lot of work helping financial services organizations with collaboration. So, large organizations, a um, long focus on knowledge work. A lot of financial services is knowledge work. There's also some organizations as well, but and they also are pretty well structured as hierarchical top-down structures with a strong, long history of process discipline and tight compliance and tight control, and a high risk and compliance orientation. So those organizations, successful in one era, but as they start to compete with, novel fintechs, they start to try to deliver the level of customer service that the current environment has demanded of them. Responsiveness is not measured by the time it takes them to search their policies and procedures. It's measured by how quickly an online customer service experience occurs. So these organizations have to change and adapt. And most importantly, the work I've done has been about enabling them to instead of seeing 40,000, 50,000 employees as a dead weight cost, it's actually to see that as a sensing network. How can you use your employees to understand what your competitors are doing, what your customers are doing, how you might need to respond, using your employees to identify breaks in your processes. All of those organizations' processes are so complex that inherently they're broken. They live at a level of complexity where there are guaranteed to be breaks. There's a great paper from MIT that I was just reading last week, which is about why complex systems fail. And basically, one of the theses of the paper is they're designed to fail. They've got so many failure points in them and so many layers of redundancy to prevent failure. And one of the things that the organizations can do is use their employees to identify broken processes, to fix them either at the spot or escalate them to be fixed. And so it's this kind of work that I've been doing with organizations that it's all around, how do you leverage that potential of your people to help you get to that next level of performance?
So if you had one tip, a starter tip perhaps, on how to build a system or a culture that is able to take in those observations from the network of human sensors, as opposed to seeing them as a distraction or irrelevant, what might it be?
Teach your leaders to ask questions instead of provide answers.
Wow. Well, that's beautiful. In some cases, a tall order, but
But
a powerful, simple piece of
it's
advice.
really simple, and it's a behavior they teach. If they learn to ask questions instead of provide answers, all your people will ask questions instead of providing answers. And before you know it, you've turned the whole culture of an organization around to one that's listening, sensing, and reacting to the environment instead of playing out routines to clients and playing out process and saying, I can't do it because that's what the policy says.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I I presume that some amount of balance between those two, of the perhaps the light and the dark, the structured and the flowing, might be the ideal state.
Oh, I mean, I'm only giving this advice because they're far too structured. One of the concepts I talk to my clients about is think in terms of degrees of freedom. You don't have to move from black to white. There's plenty of gray in between. The challenge of organizations in organizational design, in processes, in the way you lead is to decide how much gray do we want and where. So, where do you give degrees of freedom because that's going to achieve your strategic value? Where don't you give degrees of freedom because you have compliance requirements or you have other system requirements that force you into a fixed process? If you understand where you can have latitude and where you are fixed, then you've got an opportunity to leverage this. We don't all need to become holocratic. We can choose where we sit on that spectrum from full hierarchy to full autonomy.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we've got some organizational culture, and inevitably it will face challenges, and today here we are, facing globally, collectively, a major challenge. I have found really inspiring the things that you have been writing on your blog, that you've been sharing on Twitter, about reflections on the pandemic. You're engaged in dialogue uh, with people throughout the network, with a wide variety of organizations. Can you start by giving us your high level summary, perhaps, of what you are working to bring to the conversation about COVID-19?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing is, we're all dealing with a rude shock. None of us had this in our 2020 plans. A lot of the things that we wanted to do can't be done. And so the first part of this is we all have probably viewed work in very mechanical ways. That there are jobs to be done, processes to be done, meetings to attend, places to go, outcomes to achieve, a very inputs to outputs mindset of what work involves. And I think the first thing we need to do is lean into some of this human side of it. There's a bit of grieving going on. There's a lot of support required. It's madly uncertain, and because it's madly uncertain, we need people are craving information and security, and they're craving leadership in this environment. So the first part of it is help trying to just provide my experience and the using a process of working out loud. So, sharing ideas as they develop and sharing actions as they go into action and seeing what comes back from them. So trying to work through that process out loud through my blog and through Twitter and through other social channels, because I find that that's a really valuable exercise in learning, fostering a little bit of inspiring, and continuing that flow through the network as we all try to adapt to this. So the first part is that human challenge. The second part is then what practically can we do given we are now in this very different world? Because I guess the second thing that worries me is when people start to react with the kind of, oh, the virus won't let me do it. And one of my kind of themes is the virus doesn't get to decide. We do. So, we have to make choices and we have to decide on what we do next. And whether it's an individual or an organization, they're grappling with the same challenges at this time about what's most important now, what should I do next. These are the kinds of things that people are leaning into and need structure and frameworks to tackle.
What kinds of answers to that question have you seen individuals or organizations offer? The question of what can I do next? Anything stand out?
Yeah, look, I mean, at an organizational level, I think that what's been most powerful for me are organizations that have taken this as a time to think about, some of those core things that we've probably used as platitudes over the last little while, things like purpose and values. But they have real meaning now. If you're not using purpose and values to make decision in this environment, they're not purpose and values, they're just hobbies. So, how we apply them now really matters. And then stepping out of that conversation is what matters most. We all came into 2020 with strategic agendas and an arm's length long, right? But given our constraints, given the difficulty of the environment, given how constrained all our counterparties are, we need focus. We need to focus on one or two or three big things that are most important in value. So at an organizational level, it's thinking about those values, the culture, focusing on a few things, and then putting in the supports to enable people to execute any of that in the current environment. So everyone, working from home, are you supporting the autonomy? Are you delivering new leadership that supports the way we need to work from home? There's a great line I saw yesterday, which is, we're not working from home. We're trying to work from home in a global pandemic with our families there as well. That's a very different environment. So do we have the leadership, the culture, and the support for that environment? And do we have the tools for that as well? So that's the kind of organizational view. The individual view for me probably comes from the other end. It comes from, am I safe? Am I centered? Are the people I care about safe and centered? Am I doing the basics? Am I washing my hands, not touching my face? Those kinds of things. And then once I get out of the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, can I find little steps to take that just move me forward? How do I go step by step a bit? And how do I, through that process, get back to realizing my goals, realizing my potential, and using this as an opportunity of growth? I've done things in the last 2 weeks since I've been, locking down that I never thought I would do. Um, you know, Sold new clients entirely over video conferencing in different states, never having met them before, putting everything into the virtual experience and having only that as the way I engage with them, and planning the entire engagement to be entirely virtual because that's the only choice we have at this time. And that forces you to rethink the way you engage, the way you think about making sure you're getting the relationship you need to build through these tools. That's a very different environment.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing the personal angle on that as well. I'm sure we'll have lots of folks that can relate and feel inspired by that. I want to ask, perhaps as a last major subject, I'm going to ask for you to reflect on your thoughts about thought leadership and the singular voice of the of the thought leader, and the alternate view of change that you offer.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we've had what may be the heyday of thought leadership in recent times. I think we've created and well recognized global leaders now, which I think is incredibly powerful. We've leveraged this new technology to lift voices that perhaps weren't as well recognized before. We've been able to take those to a global audience, and that's been powerful in terms of the distribution of powerful ideas, as presenting inspiration for people. But I think that the key for me has always been thought leadership exists to lead thought to action. It doesn't exist to just make us feel good. And I think perhaps if I have a criticism of where we've been in recent times, and it's more stark now given the environment we're in, but there's been a lot of focus in thought leadership of probably the nice feel good, TEDx stage talk that make us feel warm inside. They're so formulaic that there is even a TEDx parody of a TEDx talk. Where there's no content at all. So there's this danger that we're losing that value of thought leadership, and because of the power law that exists in most networks and most tables of influence, a few voices dominate the networks in some cases. And I think what I've been very focused on is real work occurs in small communities of change. That real action we're all craving, whether we're talking about changing, you know, the climate crisis, or we're talking about changing response to COVID, or we're talking about changing your organization, or you're talking about fixing your local community or your suburb or your apartment or condo, like all of that happens in really small communities of change. There's not an individual heroic leader who does that work. There's a group of people who come together and work out how they're going to work together and then make that change happen. And so I think in thought leadership, we need to remember that's the target group. That's the group that needs to do the work. And we need to look for people who are sometimes working in those groups and perhaps not on the stages, because that's elevating those voices, elevating their stories is what creates exceptional change from my perspective.
Simon, you're such a thoughtful guy. I want to ask, why do you think we're so fixated on the singular heroic leader when so much change is in fact driven by small groups? Any
I
theories?
think, yeah, I mean, I think um, it's the easy answer. You know, um, there's a wonderful, I love poetry. So there's a wonderful poem by C.P. Cavafy, an Egyptian poet, called Waiting for the Barbarians. And it's all about this imagined state of Rome waiting for a barbarian invasion. And everyone's not doing anything because, the barbarians are coming today. And at the end of the poem, the barbarians don't come that day. And he ends with a line which I'll mangle, but is something along the lines of, the barbarians were a kind of solution. That idea of a single heroic leader who will change everything, whether it's a president or a CEO or a magical consultant or that thought leader, in times of complexity, in times of crisis, um, that person is reassuring. That person gives us hope. That person feels like a solution. And the best of them get us to do the work without us even realizing we do the work. There's a line from Lao Tzu, the great Chinese philosopher, that great leaders, at the end, the people say we did it ourselves. And that's the kind of piece that, for me, I think great leaders understand that it's not about them. It's about how others take that challenge and move it forward. But we are enraptured by the extrovert. We are enraptured by big egos. We do love exercises of power. And so, that Napoleonic, heroic, huge leader who seems to be able to do everything captivates us. And it often distracts us from the fact that the best of them don't do anything at all. They just allow their teams and organizations to be inspired and then to lift and take on the challenge in a new way.
Beautiful. I sure hope that the world continues to change in that direction. And I really appreciate your clarity in articulating the opportunity there.
Oh, thank you, Marshall. But look, I think the answer is, it won't change under its own. The universe bends, but we've got to do a bit of the heavy lifting ourselves. So again, people need to make choices in their own contexts, in their own organizations. How much of this can they do, and how much of this can they support others to make change possible? That's where that idea of degrees of freedom comes back in. We each get to choose how much freedom are we going to take on ourselves, and how are we going to execute that.
Well, in good times and in bad, I think that those are wise words, and some inspiring thinking that we can apply. Simon, if folks want to connect with you on an ongoing basis and continue learning from you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, they can reach out through Change Agents Worldwide, or through my personal website, simonterry.com, available on both, or LinkedIn, or any of the other channels, Twitter, and so forth. I'm very happy to continue the conversation with anyone who's interested in working out loud together on this.
Wonderful. Well, I am excited to continue that dialogue with you now, having had this conversation right here on the Sprinklr Coffee Club. It's a whole new dialogue we'll be able to have, and I really appreciate you joining us. All right.
Thanks, Marshall.
You're welcome. Folks, please do come back and give the Sprinklr Coffee Club a little like or subscribe wherever you're watching today, to be notified of all the conversations and the highlights and future episodes, and go out and connect with Simon and I both. We'd love to talk to you on the internet as we collectively work together to deal with our biggest challenges and seize our biggest opportunities. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, and thanks again for joining the Sprinklr Coffee Club.